The lower which corner?
Left hand. Just hover down by there and you should see a little microphone thing that says mute.
I'm going to turn off chat now too. Okay.
Ready?
Whenever you're ready, Mr. Mayor.
All right. I call the 2,312th meeting of the Milwaukee City Council to order. Before we begin, this meeting is being held through a Zoom video conference. All non-city participant microphones have been muted. Presenters and members of the public will be unmuted if you are called on to speak. We ask that all participants label their Zoom user to show their first and last names for the record. For those calling in, we ask that you email ocr@milwaukeeoregon.gov and provide your name and contact information for the record. The chat function will be disabled for most of the meeting, and it will be turned on when comment is taken. We ask that all participants be respectful.
Pull the chat.
Remember,
Okay, I think you're more qualified.
and remember that anything written in the chat will be part of the meeting record. If participants disrupt the meeting, we will mute and remove them. If those measures fail to stop the disruptors, we will recess the meeting and return within 5 minutes. If we are unable to continue, council will briefly meet off air to move unfinished business to the April 21st meeting. If you have technical issues, please contact staff at ocr@milwaukeeoregon.gov and we will attempt to help you. All right, please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So this is the second time we've read this statement at a council meeting, and both of them have been these virtual meetings, so I look forward to getting to do it in person. But the city of Milwaukee respectfully acknowledges that our community is located on the ancestral homeland of the Clackamas people. In 1855, the surviving members of the Clackamas signed the Willamette Valley Treaty, also known as the Kalapuya, etc. Treaty, with the federal government in good faith. We offer our respect and gratitude to the indigenous people of this land. I think we're in an interesting moment with COVID-19 to think about what happened to many of the indigenous people and why many of the tribes don't exist anymore, and that is that they either on purpose or accidentally became infected with some of our diseases that ravaged many tribes. So it's an interesting moment in history for us to be aware of that. On announcements, we are going to do a quick thing here. We're going to talk a little bit about this moment we find ourselves in and the work that that the city and the council are doing to deal with it. As I'm sure you are all painfully aware, a few weeks ago, or a lifetime, whichever is longer, our world changed. As it turns out, Oregon has joined the ranks of places like San Francisco and South Korea by keeping our spread of COVID very low. On March 15th, the city closed the library. On the morning of March 17th, we closed City Hall and our Johnson Creek Boulevard facility. That same day, Governor Kate Brown issued an executive order number 2007, which prohibits on-premise consumption of food and drink and gatherings of 25 people or more. And that evening, Milwaukee City Council declared a state of emergency and issued a letter to the community from the City Council about COVID-19. On March 19th, I reached out to Mayor Wheeler and the rest of the Metro Mayor's Consortium with concern that we needed to take further steps and most of the mayors were in that process as well. On March 21st, the mayors agreed on a letter asking for a closure of everything besides essential businesses. Our intent was to do it ourselves if either the governor or the counties didn't. On March 23rd, 2020, Governor Kate Brown issued Executive Order 2012, Stay Home, Save Lives, which directs individuals to stay home and ordered the closure of certain non-essential businesses where personal contact is difficult or impossible to avoid. It's not quite as strong as the mayor's version, but it seems to be working. So keep it up. The social distancing is working. Please reach out to friends who live alone, particularly the elderly, as they are not so connected on social media, and a phone call can really cheer them up. Next, we're going to have the counselors go through. We'll have Councilor Heisey talk about amended city services, Councilor Falconer about the eviction moratorium, Councilor Beatty about prescription delivery and buy local restaurants, Councilor Parks, who will introduce the work that we've been doing for small businesses and the CET program. Then we will come back to the regular agenda and extend the state of emergency and move on through the rest of the agenda. So, Councilor Heisey.
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to let you all know that we worked pretty hard to respond very swiftly in the city, and kudos to our staff for stepping up. And I know that our city manager, our assistant city manager, and our attorney in particular were extremely busy the first week and a half. And thank you so much for your leadership and nimbleness in responding to something none of us were ready for. I have been participating the past 3 weeks in calls that have been hosted by the League of Oregon Cities. And the League has been pulling together excellent presenters from all over the country to help educate us in city government all over the state about the response to the crisis. Thanks to LOC for really doing a great job with those calls. I've learned a ton, and I've been able to share that information with my colleagues here. And back to what the city really acted on very quickly. Before anyone practically had time to even worry about it, we had declared that we were going to suspend any water shutoffs for non-payment, and we reconnected anyone who had been disconnected because of non-payment. So water is essential, especially when you're fighting a virus. Our residents have that whether or not they can pay for it right now. Our municipal court is delaying sending people who are behind on their payments to collections, and our license suspensions are delayed until all of this is over with. There are no fines for our library books. Please keep them until the library is open again. And we have a temporary parking program for residents downtown who may be having some health issues themselves or need to park near their homes downtown. Residents downtown because they are either self-quarantining or are taking care of someone who is ill. And that program has been, I know is being utilized, and I'm so glad we can help people when they really need to be supported. All of this is covered in greater detail, including how you can get one of those permits if you are a downtown resident, on our COVID website on the City of Milwaukee website. That was it.
Who is next?
Councilor Faulkner.
Thank you. So I think that, you know, we have been, I'm sure, receiving lots of interest, and so have a lot of other people around the state, because there's so much confusion about what the governor's eviction moratorium means, and depending on what county you're in, what has been done at that level. I think there's an excellent article that I would recommend everyone checking out who has any interest in this topic. It's at OPB, and it talks about Oregon's eviction moratorium and what you need to know. It goes through some of the most common misconceptions, and I think that it would be really helpful to list some of those. I think that there's also very good information available at the county's website. And if you go to clackamas.us and look for evictions, you'll see important information on that website as well. And it also goes through, some of the things that the moratorium does and what it doesn't do. So in a nutshell, I want people to understand that it temporarily prevents evictions from moving forward. It requires that court appearances, certain court appearances, including evictions and a lot of civil matters as well, be postponed while the courts work through and prioritize family matters, criminal matters, prioritizing, based on some sense of urgency. I think it's really important to understand that there are other potential avenues of relief that are under consideration, including potential legislation and relief for both landlords and tenants whose income has been disrupted because of the COVID. I think that it's really important that if your income has been impacted, that you reach out to your landlord or right away and discuss those changes, because I think that even in the governor's order, there will be some level of proof of inability to pay for whatever legislation might become available. It only protects evictions, beginning the process that's Multnomah County for non-payment due to COVID. And so I think that, using those resources as a guide and keeping in touch with us and checking out our website will be really, really valuable moving forward, because I do think things will change relatively. You continue to change and evolve, and so I think it's really important that you ask, make sure you're in contact with your landlord if you're having trouble to pay, but also make sure that you're reaching out to us and checking out those resources. I'd like to suggest to my fellow counselors that because of the I'm sure the urgency that so many people in our community are feeling right now, I would suggest that we put as much pressure on the state to do as much as possible, recognizing that it's going to be the whole package and not any one thing that's going to really help alleviate some of the problems that are happening, and really giving people some sense of stability during this really difficult time.
Good. Lisa, I think you're next.
Yes, thank you. So I wanted to talk about two things, and I'll make them short, but a big thanks to the men and women of the Milwaukee Police Department who have stepped up to offer prescription delivery services to people in the community in need of those. If you are 60 or older, or if you have a serious health condition and you need your prescription picked up from a Milwaukee pharmacy, the police are willing to do that and bring it to your home. This is for Milwaukee residents only, and I know there are a lot of people who think they're Milwaukee residents, unfortunately, who aren't. That's been clear watching the Hidden Hearts Milwaukee page, which is a lovely page on Facebook if people haven't seen it, of people who are trying to express their solidarity through heart putting hearts out there in the community. But anyway, if you live within the city borders of Milwaukee, and your prescription comes from a pharmacy in Milwaukee, meaning Rite Aid, Walgreens, or Safeway, then the police department will be happy to pick up that prescription and deliver it to you. And what you need to do is simply call the police non-emergency number between 8 a.m. and 4 p.m. on weekdays, and that number is 503-786-7500. Again, 786-7500. The other and again, thanks very much to Chief Strait and the police department for providing that service for our residents. The other thing I just wanted to encourage people is about supporting the local restaurants that are that have remained open for takeout and delivery services. The city maintains a list of those on the city's website. And I'm not going to read them all here, but there are a few of the food carts, I think 3 of the food carts in the food cart pod, and another 10 or so restaurants within Milwaukee that are still providing food and would love to have your business. And I think I try to order out and go pick things up. You can use delivery services like Grubhub, etc. I think I would also recommend, I mean, there are lots of sources on food safety, and I don't want to hold myself out there as an expert on all those things. We refer people to the Centers for Disease Control, cdc.gov, to the state and other websites, but I will just mention one that I have found very helpful when thinking about both groceries and takeout food services and how to handle it and how to be safe. And it's actually I'm not going to be able to just read the website because it's too long of a thing, but it's a comprehensive guide to food safety and coronavirus on the SeriousEats.com website. It's maintained by a restaurant owner in San Francisco, and he's updating it every day or two. His name is Kenji Lopez Alt, and it's really a very comprehensive thing. He gives you links to the government sources or the scientific sources for the stuff he cites for the recommendations in there, but it's a very good comprehensive site, and it gave me a lot more comfort level frankly in picking up food and or getting food from carry out from local businesses. So I would encourage people to search out those resources and check the city of Milwaukee, MilwaukeeOregon.gov/COVID, which is where a lot of these city resources are, including the list of restaurants that are maintaining hours these days. So please buy local, support our local businesses. Thank you.
Yep. Thanks, Lisa. Wilda.
Thanks. I think I'm unmuted. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I've had the honor this last few weeks to work with city staff on some economic development issues and needs and find out what's going on. And, I want to preface this by noting that there are a lot of things that, in any geographic area that make us comfortable or make us realize that we, like a certain place or whatever, but just like first amongst them, I think, are locally owned businesses, small businesses, the variety of what you call mom and pop businesses or, other smaller businesses that might be an attorney's office or chiropractic or, how to turn paper into something really beautiful, somewhere. And the tattoo folks and the hairdressers and the barber shops and the restaurants and the coffee shops. And obviously I could go on and on and on. Those are the heart of Milwaukee. And those types of businesses are the ones that generally the region, the state, the federal government do not have resources for. There may be some opportunities for certain things, but a lot of times it's in the midst of, like loans or things like that in these small businesses. if they've been shut down, they have absolutely no income coming in and no way to continue, any of their services. So in Milwaukee, what to do? Well, for us, that meant, first of all, let's start talking to all of our businesses and find out what's going on with them, what their needs are, what could help them do better. What do they think about the situation? What ideas could they give us? So between city staff and myself, we did a large number of phone calls, would have had one-on-one personal visits, but that wasn't permissible. So we did one-on-one phone calls. We sent information about resources to every business that has a business license in Milwaukee. We talked, like I said, to dozens of different businesses, had them fill out surveys so that we could get information back. And from that came a program that you're going to hear about in just a few minutes, and that I hope my fellow councilors will believe is beneficial to our community, and will pass a resolution for that this evening. I'm really proud of our city, that we recognize how important our businesses are, and that we are stepping forward no matter where you are within the city limits of the city of Milwaukee. We want you to know that we care about you, and that we realize that you are what makes us the community that we are. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Layla Aman, our Community Development Director. She's going to talk about where the financing for this is coming from, and what some of the details are, and how folks can get an application and work through the rest of the information. So, Layla?
Councilor Parks, actually, this is Ann. I'm wondering if we can do the declaration real fast before we move forward.
Oh, yeah. Of course. Yeah, of course. Yeah.
All right, so the next item up is extending our declaration of emergency, which I've just lost. We had set it through today so that we could, if we needed to, extend it, and now we are looking at extending it through the 5th. Ann and Justin, do you guys have something you want to say about this before we get a motion?
No, I appreciate that you took this on, Mayor. I think we will more than likely be back at the meeting in May to do this again. But we're hoping with these 3-week increments that we can just do check-ins. It also gives us a chance to update the community about where things are at. And so that's part of why we're doing these shorter chunks of time.
All right, so I would entertain a motion.
I would so move to adopt.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded to extend the emergency declaration related to COVID-19 through May 5th, 2020. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None heard. It passes unanimously. All right, now we will talk about the resolution on COVID-19 Business Relief Fund.
There you go. Great. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. I appreciate the opportunity to be part of that discussion. Thank you. Layla.
Great. Thanks, Councilor Parks. And thank you for the introduction. Scott will be running the slideshow here. So Scott, if you could just move to the next slide with the website. We keep pushing this out there, but I think it's an important resource for folks. So I'm going to talk to you today about our proposal to use some city resources we have to create a business relief fund. I want to have folks be able to point themselves to our website. So if you go to the next slide, Scott, if you go to our COVID page, the city staff have really been working hard to pull together as many resources as we can in an effort to help our businesses and our residents, our community members that may be really suffering from some of the impacts of the COVID-19 public health emergency. So our team has been doing a ton of research. We provided a series of links and resources, so hopefully folks don't have to do as much homework. If you go to the COVID website, you can click on the resident and business impact support resources. In terms of what we're collecting there is that we're trying to keep up to speed with all of the both federal, state, county, and local resources there and compiling as much information as we can on that space. So it's a landing space for our community members to start. So information, some examples that you can find on there are about the Federal CARES Act. So we have a link directly to the Small Business Owners Guide. It gives you guidance on what the Paycheck Protection Program is. It's a forgivable loan up to 8 weeks if employees are kept on the payroll. This is, again, the federal programs. The economic injury disaster loans. There's also other emergency loans that are part of that. So you can access those resources from our website. We're also compiling regional and state resources, as I mentioned, working with Greater Portland Inc., other organizations. The Governor's Office of Regional Solutions has been really helpful. So our staff is participating in that and pulling together as much information as we can. And ideally, our hope is that by doing this work, we can make it marginally easier for folks trying to find resources and save time. So those are the business resources that we're compiling. So the next slide outlines some of the resident pieces that we're looking at as well. So we're tracking those, compiling as much as we can. Councilor Falconer talked about the eviction moratoriums. We have links to those so folks can learn more about that. This was also mentioned already, but probably worth mentioning again, is our finance department is offering adjustments. Water shutoffs for non-payment are suspended. We have some links there. So this list shows some information that folks can access if they're having issues with rental assistance. So you can quickly identify where you can go to get some of those resources as well. So the County Coordinated Housing Access Line, the phone number's up there. Dialing 211 if you need assistance finding food, paying bills, or other essential services, and then some other resources available as well. So we'll be prioritizing that and staying up to speed with the most up-to-date information we possibly can. On to the next, please. So one of the main things that, so Councilor Parks mentioned, we've been doing quite a few things. I do want to highlight that both folks on my staff, Allison Wicks and Christina Fadenrecht, have just been really instrumental in doing the majority of the heavy lifting on this. We have been making, and we being the collective we, so Councilor Parks, Christina, and Allison have been making phone calls to many of our businesses. Some of the things that we've been doing is trying to support businesses that are still open for takeout. So we've had one-on-one conversations with many folks and trying to keep that information up and available. It's also on our website. We have been reaching out directly to folks that could potentially repurpose or retool in order to provide protective equipment and connecting them with the Office of Emergency Management. We've been reaching out to individual businesses as well to make them aware of some of the programs that are out there and inform them about our upcoming program as well. So my staff has been spending a ton of time on the phone with businesses who I think have been grateful to hear from us and really just trying to support them to the greatest extent that we can. And so I just want to commend the staff on that. This was just an idea we had 2 weeks ago, and I think we have reached a tremendous number of folks. And I just want to acknowledge how hard the team has been working in order to do that outreach. So what we're here to talk about tonight, if we jump to the next slide, please, Scott, thank you, is the Milwaukee Business Relief Fund. And so what we're proposing to do is council passed last year, the construction excise tax program, the majority of that funding is directed towards affordable housing. But 50% of the funds that are collected for commercial construction, so we have two pots of money we pull from. CET is both for residential construction and for commercial construction. The residential construction resources that we get for CET are designated by state statute, and those are targeted towards affordable housing. I want to also acknowledge that my predecessor, Alma Flores, is the person that pushed this through, and I think her foresight is going to hopefully pay off a little bit today, which worked with council to dedicate 50% of those funds collected on the commercial construction side to be used for economic development. And that was to implement plans that are designated as eligible by the city. And that includes our economic development strategy, our downtown and riverfront land use framework plan, our central Milwaukee plan, and the North Milwaukee industrial area plan. As Councilor Parks noted, small businesses are the heart of our community, and they're essential to our economic well-being. They're integral to our economic development strategy. I spent a lot of time on all of these plans to understand what the nexus is between the program they're proposing and the ordinance, and I feel that that nexus is very clear. I feel very confident that this program delivers on the spirit and the intent of the ordinance. And, you know, fundamentally, all of those plans really focus on a vibrant, active commercial areas, developing programs that assist emerging and undercapitalized businesses, and mitigating displacement of businesses. So I think fundamentally, the proposal that we have tonight is necessary in order to mitigate displacement or just outright closure of many of our businesses. I think there are a couple of other references I want to highlight. The downtown and riverfront land use framework plan includes goals to strengthen our downtown, to enhance our retail armature, and creating an environment where people can work, shop, and live and socialize. Our city urban renewal plan as well includes economic development goals that promote continued vitality of our current businesses. So we're intentionally proposing to use this funding source to support our existing businesses to deliver on these goals. The next slide, if you please. We have about $130,000 currently available. We're proposing to use all of that to do one-time grants of up to $5,000. We know that that will just only skim the surface. A couple of our neighbors have implemented similar programs. Portland, for example, had about $1 million in funds. They received close to $9,000 applications for that $1 million. Hillsborough also has a similar kind of fund. They had to close their applications after one day because of the enormous need that they had. I think they had more than double what they had available. So we know that $130,000 can only get us so far, but we do believe that this program will be beneficial to the businesses and will certainly help hopefully stay some of the impacts that are just going to happen from what's happening. So I just want to highlight that. We move to the next slide. So what we're proposing is that businesses that are eligible, have to have a current Milwaukee business license, but they are publicly facing businesses that are directly impacted by Executive Orders 2007, which is social distancing, and then 2012, which is the Stay Home, Save Lives. So we're really going to be looking to those businesses that are either directly named or directly impacted by the governor's order. We know all businesses are going to be experiencing some level of impact, but given the resources that we have in our focus, we're proposing to go in this direction. We're also proposing that businesses that are experiencing a 25% or higher decline in revenue. So those would be those are the minimum requirements. Unfortunately, I think many businesses will meet those. And so that's the starting point. On the next slide, we will have to, again, as I mentioned, I expect that we're going to get an overwhelming requests for the resources that we have. So we're proposing that we'll give priority again to businesses affected by the governor's order. We are going to be focusing on smaller businesses because, as Councilor Parks mentioned, those are typically the ones that have the least amount of access to larger resource pools. We are going to be prioritizing women-owned, person of color-owned, and veteran-owned businesses as well, which is in line and spirit with the city's goals to increase equity. And then again, they have to demonstrate a connection to the city's economic development plans and strategies related to the construction excise tax ordinance. There will be businesses that do not qualify. So if we jump to the next slide, those that are part of a national franchise. And so the hope there is, and many of the other programs that we've looked at have similar kinds of requirements, that there's hopefully resources there. Nonprofits will not be eligible for this as well. And then businesses whose primary revenue is generated from rental properties, and then anyone who is basically in default or has current liens owed to the city of Milwaukee. So those will be some ways that we'll be able to sift through what I expect to be a fairly large pool of applications. On the next slide, so our anticipated timeline is aggressive. Again, I just want to give kudos to my team, and not only my team, I think of the entire city staff as our team, but the finance department has been instrumental in this as well. So, you know, putting a program together in 2 weeks and then allocating checks in about the same amount of time is an enormous undertaking, and one we're happy to do. So I just want to say that the finance team has just been a partner in this, and we couldn't do it without their support and help. So I'm really grateful to them for partnering up with us to meet what I expect to be an extremely aggressive timeline, because we know that businesses need help now. We anticipate that these sources of funds will be used sort of as a stopgap measure before businesses can start to see some of the federal relief coming through. So we're really hoping that this resource will help tie folks over long enough to get at some of those larger pots of money that will be coming down from the federal government. So we're anticipating a fairly short window for the application period. If council approves the resolution tonight, we expect to drop the application tomorrow morning, and then we will have that open until close of business on Friday, April 10th. Then my team and I will cull through those applications, and we anticipate notifying grant recipients the week of April 20th, and then making those grant resources available as soon as possible. So we're aiming for late April or early May. So that's a big lift, and again, one that we're happy to make to support our business community and the city. So with that, the action we're requesting tonight is for council to approve the resolution that authorizes the use of the construction excise tax revenue for the Business Relief Fund. And with that, I would be happy to entertain any questions of council.
Yeah, Layla, I know there were some businesses or private entities that had offered to add money to that pot. Were you able to find out the legality of that opportunity?
Yes, so we can accept donations. Right now, we can only accept donations in the form of checks. And so we are working on establishing that. And then that would go into this pot of money that we could then allocate out through the program. So it would be specific to the program. The city would need to provide a receipt to folks that do make those donations, but it would be specific to this program. So we're developing an account, and we will likely have some sort of window attached to that, so that we can, as applications come in, I expect that we'll have a sort of second string list of businesses that maybe didn't get first round allocations, and we would likely go back to that list if we get additional funding in that through donations. So I joked about this early when I was talking with the leadership team that we wanted this to be like the NPR of business grants. And so we would just ask that folks that have the means, if you are able to donate, the city will make sure that those resources get out. Every penny will go out. So every penny that you donate will be reallocated out to a business that qualifies for the program.
Layla, have you gotten any clarity on whether or not our neighborhood district associations can make donations? I know they're not meeting right now, so the timeline would definitely have to line up with a second string. But I know that they all have money, and I think many of them would like to help.
Yes, we can certainly take resources from them, or we can work with them on how we get those resources in. But we could allocate them to this pot of money.
Okay, great, thanks.
Yeah.
Councilor Heisey, just to continue on that, if you do hear from any of the leadership from any NDAs, please have them contact Layla directly, or they can talk to Jason Wax. He's also been involved in these conversations, and we'll make sure that we get everybody pulled together quickly.
Great. Yeah, I don't think it'll be anytime soon since nobody's holding meetings, but
yeah.
It's important for us to start getting that out there to the NDA so that they know that if they would like to help, that is an option available to them once they are meeting.
I think that's a great idea. I hope that some of them will maybe try to do an email vote of their members or something to, if that's permissible. But
well, and our staff have been working on finding ways for them to have alternative meeting mechanisms like Zoom. So we will be sending an email out this week that helps them figure out paths forward in the current environment.
Great. Good. Thank you.
Yeah, and once we get through this kind of initial process, we are working in parallel to get that word out, to set up information so that folks can easily provide money. We're grateful. I'm not at all surprised that many members of our community are calling and reaching out to staff to see if there's a way to support their businesses. And so, I think that's in spirit with the community that we live in. So I'm really happy to hear that.
So, Layla, will you, if this passes council tonight, will you and your staff be sending something out to all the businesses that are in the database that meet this criteria, the 10 and fewer and, whatever? Will something go out to them so they'll know that this is, yes, it is passed and it's available, applications are online now, kind of thing?
Yeah, we'll be sending out an email. Again, staff have been, both Christine and Allison have been making direct calls to businesses as well that kind of meet this criteria. So they've either left messages or spoken with business owners. So we've been doing both direct outreach, and then we'll be pushing it out via all of our other channels as well.
Okay, yeah. And I'll get back to all the folks that I talked to and, let them know also, so.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, if they hear it more than once, that's all the better than not ever hearing it at all.
Yeah, I don't think that's a bad thing.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
I would also just make a request, since I see her on this email. It would be really great if, Kelly, you could help us get the word out, Kelly Keener, out to the businesses in the downtown core and any of the other businesses you work with that are our small business providers. We'd really appreciate it.
Yeah, and I just got a note from Allison, too, that we sent an email out yesterday. So, as usual, my staff's one step ahead.
Good.
Any other questions or comments?
I have a question on a sort of related, because it's related to CET and the ability to allocate funds from that program in ways that we are somewhat novel. We were going to have this conversation during regular budget cycle, but I think that it might make sense to go ahead and move the conversation up in terms of a rental assistance program, since we do have money available in that fund as well. I think that it's it's going to be some time before we've got federal resources allocated to rental assistance. And so I think that the time is now, or I guess maybe next regular session as soon as possible, to be having that conversation.
Yeah, I agree. I also want to make it clear to people, I know there was a little bit of confusion and Layla touched on it, but I want to make it super clear. So our construction excise tax has two parts, and one of the parts is broken into two. So there's the money that comes in from residential construction, and there's money that comes in from commercial construction. What the money we're talking about tonight is the part from the commercial construction, and that part is divided into two parts. So part of it has to be used to build affordable housing, in that case, workforce housing. And then this other half of it can be used more flexibly. So this isn't the entirety of our CET fund, which is why Angel's proposing what she's proposing, and I think it's a good idea. But this is just the one portion of one part of our CET.
And Councilor Faulkner, this is Ann. I did ask Layla to be prepared with a response on that, so she did a little digging, and I'd like to give her a few minutes to talk about it.
Yeah, thanks, Ann. So as the mayor pointed out, that's true. So we have two pots of money, as I started with, a residential pot. The way that those resources are allocated are outlined by state statute. So we actually looked at that and looked at whether or not any of those funds could be used for rental assistance. And our assessment of that was no. So the other pot of money, which is more flexible because that's determined by local ordinance, and the ordinance that you adopted splits it into two parts, as the mayor mentioned, one into economic development, which is the fund that we're talking about today, which has $130,000 in it, roughly, for this program. And then the other half is for, as the mayor also mentioned, workforce housing for developer incentives. And so the language there is pretty specific to construction of new affordable housing. But I believe, and I think we would need to get some additional guidance on this, that those funds, should council decide to address that, I think that there may be some flexibility there. And so we can look at that, but it would require an amendment to the ordinance to change how those funds can be allocated, because it's pretty specific right now to providing developer incentives to build housing. So I don't think that there's not a path forward, but the path forward requires some steps and some consideration of how that would unfold.
I would be interested in knowing if making such a change would affect any of our current projects or anything we have in the hopper. Sparrow Street is one, Coho.
We do have Layla coming back at the next meeting, the next regular meeting, to talk about CET. And if you are interested, we can do a little digging in advance of that meeting to be able to talk about this in more depth. Is that fair?
Yep. Thank you.
I would also chime in and say that to the extent we know there are people out there looking for ways to help others, whether that's corporate, businesses in Milwaukee or individuals. In the meantime, Northwest Housing Alternatives does offer a lot of sort of this stopgap rental assistance and programs to try and keep people in their homes. And they are definitely looking for support. They've had to cancel their annual big spring fundraiser, which is a 10K run. So Northwest Housing Alternatives right here in Milwaukee, find them on the website and give them some money to help those programs.
And Councilor Beatty, just to follow up on that, if the council does decide to go down this path, Councilor Faulkner and I have talked about the fact that Northwest Housing is probably the best provider of some sort of rental assistance program. So what we have been investigating has been whether or not we could do some sort of transfer to them to be able to let them do their work better. we are not set up to be able to vet the number of applications that we would have to, or the qualifications of those individuals. So when we come back in 2 weeks, we'll talk a little bit more about that, but that has been the case by which we've been investigating this option. And I have spoken with them, so this shouldn't catch them off guard either.
Yeah, we'll do our homework because we want to be certain that if that is the direction you want to go, that we can use those funds for that, because the residential pot of money is pretty clear that's supposed to provide affordable housing incentives to provide housing, and so providing temporary rental assistance doesn't necessarily do that. And so we just want to make sure that we have all the information so that you can make an informed decision on how to, if you want to reallocate those funds. Specific projects, to Councilor Heisey's point, that would be impacted. At this point, it wouldn't impact Sparrow or Coho. Neither of those projects were slated to get funding from the commercial pot of money. We were set before this all happened to start really advancing the CET affordable housing program. We're still working on that, but it's a bit of a back burner at the moment. But again, I just want to make sure we get the right legal advice on whether or not we have the ability to do that, and we can help you with that next time.
Okay. Any other questions or comments?
I had not a question or comment. Well, I guess it's a comment on the affidavit itself, and now I can't find it. I mean, on the resolution itself. I would like to propose that there's the third whereas says many small businesses in downtown and central Milwaukee will be impacted by the governor's order. I think we need to change that to the present tense and say are being impacted by the governor's order. And with that amendment, I would be happy to make a motion to approve if nobody else has other issues or nobody wants to discuss that. Okay, I move to approve the resolution authorizing the use of construction excise tax revenue for a business relief fund program with the one minor change to the third whereas to place it in the present tense.
Do I hear a second?
Oh, Councilor Heisey's.
Is everybody muted, Scott?
Counselor, everyone's muted? That shouldn't have been.
It seems to be.
Unmuting.
Thanks. I would second the resolution.
Yeah, I'll second, third, whatever needs to happen.
Thank
First
you.
and second.
Kathy's over there trying to sign. Okay. It has been moved and seconded to approve the resolution authorizing the use of construction excise tax revenue for a business relief fund program. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None heard. It passes unanimously.
Woohoo!
Thank you.
Good work, everybody. Great job, Wilda and Leila and team.
Well, we've got such great staff that has worked so hard on this, so they really deserve tons of thanks. And we have a great business community that has been very civil about the fact that they can't work right now. So, yeah, it all goes hand in hand to make community. Thank you.
Thank you. And we're off.
Okay. Yeah. Have fun. Tonight's consent agenda includes minutes of the February 18th, 2020 work session, February 18th, 2020 regular session, the March 3rd, 2020 work session, the March 3rd, 2020 regular session, the March 10th, 2020 study session, a resolution appointing Carla Branson and Ann Elliger to the library board, a resolution authorizing the participation in a regional wastewater system cooperative intergovernmental agreement with Water Environmental Services, the cities of Gladstone, Happy Valley, Johnson City, Oregon City, and West Lynn to establish a collaborative forum. Does any member of council wish to remove an item from the consent agenda?
Yeah.
Then I would entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda.
So moved.
I'll second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve the consent agenda. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? None heard. It passes unanimously. Audience participation. This is the part of the agenda during which council will hear community member statements regarding city business. We will now turn on the Zoom chat function. Those wishing to speak should raise their hand in the Zoom participant bar, type a comment in the Zoom chat bar, or send an email to ocr@milwaukeeoregon.gov. Before you make your comments, please clearly state your name and city of residence for the record. If you would like the city to follow up with you, please submit your contact information to ocr@milwaukeeoregon.gov. This is the first time council is taking comment in a video meeting, so we will do our best to watch for your comments. As council has other business items on the agenda this evening, speakers will be limited to 3 minutes each. Because the information provided during the public comment may be new to some councilors, the city manager will respond at the next council meeting to those comments that require follow-up. Before we begin, are there any follow-up reports from the March 17th audience participation, Ms. Ober? Was that a no?
There are not. Sorry. Thank you.
Okay, I was trying to set up a timer on my phone since Willa doesn't have her handy-dandy clock.
I was missing it.
I have the timer ready to go, Mr.
You
Mayor.
do? All right, good work.
And we do have a comment received by the OCR. I'm not seeing any hands raised or.
I am. Ernesto has his hand raised.
Yeah, and that is the person who has submitted a card to OCR.
Okay, so I'm going to unmute him.
Okay.
Ernesto, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor Gamba, and the rest of the councilors. I really appreciate you all having public comment even in this format. My comment was just related to maybe a suggestion that I was hoping that maybe the staff of the city can look into, or someone else. I know that the city of Milwaukee really cares about. Sorry, I want to go back. I need to give you my name and my city. So my name's Ernesto Dominguez. I'm a person serving on the Volunteer Leadership Academy with the city of Milwaukee, and I live in the city of Milwaukee as well. I've just noticed that the city of Milwaukee really values diversity and equity in the work that it's doing. And one thing that I've noticed other cities do, and something that I think is really powerful that I've noticed within my own university at Portland State, is people really using pronouns and having a way of like publicizing their pronouns as a way of being an advocate, a role model, but also just kind of a supporter of LGBTQ folks, or people who don't use traditional gender roles or gender pronouns. So my kind of suggestion or my kind of thought about what the city staff could look into is just either figuring out ways for city officials to add pronouns to their emails, to their business cards, to any kind of written or electronic communications they send out, but also for it to just be a common thing that happens within meetings like this, where when people introduce themselves or introduce someone new, not only do they give their name and their title or what they do for the city, but also their preferred pronoun, as a way for people to feel more comfortable giving their own. I know for me, when I'm in spaces where someone else gives their pronoun, it makes it more comfortable or kind of easier for me to give out. I've noticed that in the Milwaukee Leadership Forum, that for the first few weeks, when just one person would say their pronouns, it would just be that person. But over time, more and more people started using their pronouns and just making it a regular part of their meetings. So I just hope that the city can look at that and see if there's any way they can incorporate that into their work.
Great. Thank you. Appreciate that. All right. Is there anybody else?
I don't see any emails.
See any hands raised? I don't see anybody waving frantically. No? Going once, going twice. All righty. All right, our next item is a public hearing. It's a vacation of a public right-of-way of 51st Avenue, a resolution. The public hearing on the proposed vacation of the public right-of-way on 51st Avenue is called to order. Purpose of the, whatever you just did made my whole script go away.
Sorry.
Undo whatever you just did, please. All right, I can, somehow you take over my monitors too. The purpose of this hearing is to take public comment on the proposed street vacation. Does any council member wish to announce an actual or potential conflict of interest? No, not seeing anything. All right. This will be presented by our associate planner, Brett Kelver. So, Brett.
And now I'm going to share the screen so Brett's slides can be displayed.
Okay.
And I got to scroll all the way through. Okay, Brett.
All right. Thank you very much. Good evening, Mayor Gamba and councilors. It's nice to see you and be with you virtually. I'm here to just walk you through a process that you started at your meeting on February 18th, where you initiated this vacation. I know you're pretty familiar with this, but I'll try to be quick. But I'll just walk through this for some background for anyone who's watching who doesn't know what we're doing. So you can go to the next slide. So the area that we're focused on is shown with this the yellow rectangle. This is an area that's kind of in the heart of Milwaukee's neighborhoods on King Road. It's just across the street from the Hope City Church and just a few blocks down from the King Road Shopping Center. You can go to the next slide. So this reference point, again, the property shown in,
Sorry.
That's right. Shown in yellow in the diagram to the left. This is a property that was adjacent to the 14-lot Mission Park subdivision, and development of that subdivision, creation of those lots, resulted in what's effectively a jog in the boundary between what is now 51st Avenue and those lots there on the east side. We did get all the street improvements that the city was requiring on 51st Avenue, so it is built out the way it needs to be with the driving surface, curb, landscape strip, sidewalk, and in this one area that is adjacent to the yellow highlighted property, that property is 5084 Southeast King Road. We've ended up with a little bit of extra land that is not needed for any further right-of-way improvements. So if you go to the next slide, so that's where we're proposing to vacate that area that's shown in purple. It's a long, narrow strip that is precisely adjacent to that property at 5084 Southeast King Road. As you can see on the image to the right, really it's just essentially now kind of extra landscaping. And with the vacation action, it would actually go back to the developer of the subdivision because there are no lots from the subdivision that are adjacent to it. So with all that in mind, go to the next slide, we get to the why we are here. The planning and engineering staff recognized an opportunity to do basically a land exchange. By doing the vacation, we have arranged an agreement with the subdivision developer to transfer that property to the owners of 5084 Southeast King Road in exchange for that property to dedicate some of its land along its King Road frontage back to the city right away, where we can use it for some sidewalk improvements that we have planned for a few years from now on King Road. The packet that we prepared for you has the agreements that we've obtained from both of those parties, both the subdivision developer and the owners of 5084 Southeast King Road. So with that in mind, if you go to the next slide, just a quick recap of the process of the vacation. The council, in this case, initiated the vacation back in February. The next step we took was we sent the required public notice to the area that's dictated by the Oregon Revised Statutes, the state law. You can see just in the middle of the red hatched areas, that thin purple strip, that is the area that we're talking about vacating. So we sent the required notice to all the properties within the red hatched area, giving them an opportunity to comment. And we did field a few questions from folks who just wanted to make sure they understood what was happening and if it would affect them. We didn't receive any objections. So with that in mind, we are at the current step here, your April 7th hearing, where you're just giving kind of a final opportunity for anyone who objects. You're in a position to approve the vacation if we don't have more than a majority of owners within that notice area object. And if you do proceed with the vacation action, we'll take the final necessary steps to execute those agreements, go through the final kind of land configuration process to do the property swaps and set us up for those street improvements on King Road that we'll do at some point in the future. So with that in mind, I don't know if you have any questions about the project or anything else related.
Anybody? Have we received any correspondence on this, Brett?
No, nothing aside from what was mentioned in the staff report, the couple phone calls we fielded.
Okay. Does anyone wish to comment? I'm looking for hands raised. We'll give you a second to figure that out.
I'll re-engage the chat. There's nothing in the OCR mailbox.
All righty. Not going to read this part about taking public testimony since we're not going to do it. And if there are no further questions from the council, I will entertain a motion to close the public hearing.
I move to close the public hearing.
I'll second.
It has been moved and seconded to close the public hearing. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? None heard. The public testimony portion of the public hearing on the proposed vacation of the public right-of-way of 51st Avenue is hereby closed. Is there council discussion?
No, it seems, I mean, like we said the last time Brett was before us, it seems very logical. It was a good job on the part of staff to identify this opportunity, because King Road does need improved sidewalks. So it's a good opportunity for the city.
Yeah, go creativity.
Yeah, that's great. All right. Then is council ready to vote?
Yes.
Okay.
I move
There you go.
I move to approve the resolution authorizing the city-initiated vacation of a portion of the public street right-of-way on the west side of 51st Avenue south of King Road.
I'll second.
It has been moved and seconded to approve the resolution authorizing the city-initiated vacation of a portion of the public street right-of-way of the west side of 51st Avenue south of King Road. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None heard. It passes unanimously.
Thank you, City Council. Appreciate your work on this.
Thank you, Brad. Very creative. Good job.
Stay safe out there.
You too.
Yeah. Thanks, Brett.
All right. Good to see you.
All right. Next, we have appeal of the Planning Commission's decision to deny master land use Elk Rock Estates continued from March 17th, 2020. The public hearing on the appeal of the Planning Commission's decision to deny a natural resources cluster development application files NR 2018-005 and AP 2019-003 continued from March 17th, 2020 is called to order. This hearing will address the amended application materials submitted on February 11th pursuant to Oregon Revised Statute 197.522.5223. All persons wishing to speak on issues germane to this proposal must be recognized by the council to speak. All testimony that is directed to the applicable approved criteria or other criteria in the zoning ordinance, the Milwaukee Municipal Code, and the comprehensive plan believed to be applicable by the speaker will be received and will be used by the City Council in coming to a decision on the application. Audience demonstrations or other disruptive behavior will not be tolerated. We, the City Council, are here to listen to testimony and come to the best possible decision. The purpose of this hearing is to take public comment and deliberate on the amended development application submitted by Gillis Properties. Staff will now cite the applicable standards to be considered.
Milwaukee Municipal Code, Title 12.16, Access Management, and .24, Clear Vision at Intersections. Milwaukee Municipal Code, Chapter 17.12, 16, 20, 28, and 32, all related to land division. Title 18.04, Flood Hazard Areas. Title 19.301, Low Density Residential Zones. Title 19.401, Willamette Greenway Zone. Title 19.402, Natural Resources. Title 19.504, Site Design Standards. Title 19.505, Building Design Standards. Title 19.600, Off-Street Parking and Loading. Title 19.700, Public Facility Improvements. Couple more. Title 19.911 variances, Title 19.1006 Type 3 review, and Title 19.1010 appeals.
Okay. The order of business will be a discussion of site visits, conflicts of interest and jurisdiction, staff report, correspondence received, applicant Matt Gillis presentation of 15 minutes, testimony in support of amended application 3 minutes each, neutral testimony 3 minutes each, testimony against the amended application 3 minutes each, staff response to testimony, applicant rebuttal and final remarks 10 minutes, questions from council to staff, closure of public hearing, and discussion, tentative decision, and motion to continue hearing. The applicant has the burden of proving that the application complies with the relevant criteria of the comprehensive plan and zoning ordinance. The city is in receipt of the appeal of an amended application. All testimony and evidence must be directed toward the applicable substantive criteria. Failure to address a criterion precludes appeal based on that criterion. Failure to raise constitutional or other issues related to the application with enough specificity to allow a response precludes an action for damages in circuit court. Any party withstanding may appeal the decision of the council to the State Land Use Board of Appeals according to the rules adopted by that board. Persons withstanding are those who testify via Zoom or comment by email. Persons withstanding are those that have participated in this public hearing by any of the following methods. 1, providing written testimony in advance. 2, providing written comments during the testimony portion of the hearing tonight via Zoom, chat, or email. Or 3, providing oral testimony via Zoom during the testimony portion of tonight's hearing. So has any member of council visited the site? I have.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes. Yes.
Does any member of council wish to announce any ex parte contacts or other conflicts or any conflicts of interest?
I don't.
No.
When we started the appeal back in January or whenever it was it last year even, I announced some ex parte contacts at that time. I have had no additional ex parte contacts since that time.
Nor have I.
Do I?
Kathy, go ahead.
I have had extensive ex parte contact, and as I have done previously, out of a concern for a perception of bias clouding this process, I have recused myself. I live right across the street from this proposed development. So I will recuse myself from this vote, and I will see you all on YouTube.
All right. Does any audience member wish to challenge council's jurisdiction on this matter? If you do, is chat open, Scott?
I'll open it now. Chat is open.
Yes?
Yep, chat is open.
Okay, go ahead and raise your hand if you wish to challenge. Give it a second. Not seeing anything. Okay. Let's proceed to the staff report. We'll have Associate Planner Vera Colias and our Associate Engineer Dalton Voden.
Okay, Scott is going to queue up the presentation, so I'll give him a second. But good evening, Mayor Gamba and members of council. I think this is the biggest crowd I've been in since all this started. It's nice to see so many people. Great. Dalton and I will present the staff report for the application, but since it has been since really December that we've had any kind of a substantive discussion about this site, if you'll bear with me, we'll just spend a couple of slides bringing everybody back up to speed of where we are. We could go to the next slide, Scott, please. The site is outlined here in blue. It is located at 12205 and 12225 Southeast 19th Avenue. The site is made up of 2 tax lots and contains a total of 3.66 acres. There are 2 existing single-family homes on the site, which are proposed to be remodeled and would be part of the proposed development. The area is zoned R5, residential R5, and contains detached single-family homes to the north and the east. Elk Rock Island is to the west, and Spring Park and the unimproved Sparrow Street right-of-way is to the south. Next slide, please. This is the tax map from Clackamas County Assessors with the property outlined in red, and you can see that the slough bisects the property. Next slide, please. The 100-year floodplain covers essentially all of the site, and it also includes some floodway. All of this affects the entire area except for the very upland area directly along 19th Avenue. Next, please. These are the natural resources that are mapped on the site. Again, the project site is bisected by the slough. The site includes Willamette Greenway over the entire site. Water quality resource area that you can see here in green along the river and along the slough. Habitat conservation area, which is in the orange hatched area. And again, the 100-year floodplain on the property. Next slide, please. Thank you. So this is the original site plan that was proposed, showing 12 dwelling units, 2 private drives, and a stormwater detention area to the west of the lower level of homes. The Planning Commission denied this application with findings based specifically on deficiencies related to Title 18, the flood hazard regulations, as well as Title 19.402, natural resources. So this land use file, natural resources file 2018-005, and the specific findings of denial are the subject of the appeal by the applicant. Next slide. But during this hearing process, and as explained by the mayor in the opening remarks, pursuant to ORS 197.522 subsection 3, during this appeal process, the applicant has amended the original land use application and is now seeking land use approval for construction of a 5-lot subdivision. So what we have before us is a subdivision application. And that proposal includes the following. So there would be a total of 5 lots on the site, and you can see them labeled here on the site plan, starting at the top of the site plan to the north, lots 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Lots 1 and 5 would contain the existing homes that are on the property, and lots 2, 3, and 4 are the ones in the middle, and those would be the ones with new homes proposed. The site plan identifies the existing homes as well as the proposed, basically the the areas of disturbance that would be required in order to construct the project. So we see sort of maximum building envelopes for footprints, as well as driveways and access ways on the property. The project also includes dedication of natural resources on the western portion of the site to the west of this site plan. So what we've been referring to as the island area of the site is proposed to be dedicated to the city as mitigation for impacts to natural resources on this eastern portion of the site. We'll get into that in a minute. There are variances also being requested for minimum density on the site, lot width, frontage, and side yard height plane, and we'll get into that as we continue in the presentation. Next slide, please. So the key issues that that we've identified here are in the staff report that was prepared for council. Involve these four issues: the flood hazard regulations, natural resources, the Willamette Greenway, and the variances. And we'll start at the beginning with the floodplain. The question that we're asking is, does the proposal adequately respond to the 100-year floodplain and Milwaukee Municipal Code Title 18? And with that, I'll turn it over to Dalton to cover this portion of the staff report.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Vera. I say we jump right in, Scott. So the decision to deny and the basis for this appeal has been addressed by the amended application. The key points that the Planning Commission identified are no longer present in the amended application. Next slide, please, Scott. Thank you. And so we're left with Section 150 and 160 of Title 18, which includes subdivision proposals, the balance cut and fill, residential construction standards, and the miscellaneous provisions. Next slide, please. And so in Title 18, all subdivisions must be consistent with the need to minimize flood damage, have public utilities and facilities appropriately designed, have adequate drainage. There's no net fill allowed in any floodplain, and any excavation to balance a fill must be located on the same development parcel as the fill. Next slide, please, Scott. So we also have residential construction happening, and so that includes elevation of the first floor of each building to the design flood height, or 1 foot above the base flood elevation. Additionally, fully enclosed areas below the lowest floor must be automatically equalized hydrostatic forces. And then what brings us here today is provisions of this chapter are to be administered concurrently with Title 19. Thank you, Scott. And so what we have proposed is a subdivision with structures clustered very closely to the existing street. And so we've got utilities in the street. There's no longer a need to extend significant utilities into the floodplain. It has been limited to only what is necessary to serve those structures along the street. There's no longer shared impervious areas as with the previous application. Each home has shorter driveways, and so there's not an extensive private road. The applicant has committed to no net fill in the floodplain, as well as having first floor elevations at the required height. Thank you, Scott. So this is our FERMAT, our official FEMA map of the site with an aerial view, with the parcel identified in the red box in the lower left area map. So as we can see, it is present. Thank you, Scott. And we did receive a comment about flood insurance, and so I thought I'd take this opportunity to perhaps educate the participants, for those who may not know, that these homes, as with any home within the city, is eligible to receive flood insurance, even if you're not in the floodplain, and that is because the city administers Title 18 to meet that requirement. And as in doing so, Milwaukee's actually adopted guidelines that are stricter than the federal minimum in order to participate in the flood insurance program. And then a question was raised about how additional structures could impact current residents' premiums. And so premiums are higher for structures that are not elevated, regardless of the community's total number of policies. And that's all I have for my portion.
Okay, thanks, Dalton. So we'll move on to the natural resources review. Because the project is impacting natural resources, we need to review even this amended application, of course, to those natural resources. There's a discretionary process within the code to talk about how the proposed project is going to be disturbing the natural resources. And particularly because this is a subdivision, we're looking at an impact evaluation and alternatives analysis. We're making sure that the lots have adequate buildable area outside of the WQR and HCA, that the lot and the access configurations mitigate any potential future impact to those resources, and that the proposal retains the greatest practicable degree of contiguous HCA across the new lots. Next slide, please. So this chart was reflected in the staff report as well. And so this discusses the alternatives analysis. There was a great deal of concern voiced by both the Planning Commission and the City Council regarding the alternatives analysis under the original plan, under the 12-unit plan. And what we see here is the alternatives analysis with now the preferred development, which is the five units. And so what we can see is under the previous plan, we had disturbance in the WQR and the HCA impacts, combined both permanent and temporary impacts, nearly an acre or more in size, so 38,500 square feet and up for the prior alternatives. The preferred alternative with the 5 units and the 5 lots clustered up at 19th Avenue, we see approximately 3,100 square feet of permanent disturbance, so that reflects where there would be a building or driveway, so a permanent disturbance, and about 8,600 square feet of temporary disturbance, and that reflects the site work that would be necessary in order to construct the project. But what we're seeing here is that, and what was commented on in prior hearings, that an alternative or alternatives that showed fewer homes outside of the resource area, perhaps clustered near 19th Avenue, the applicant has done that and has proposed a development that in fact does take those comments into account and has proposed a project that is more than 60% smaller than what was originally proposed. Next slide, please. So the applicant has elected to address standard number 2 regarding the alternatives analysis and subdivisions in areas that have mapped resource areas due to the fact that over 85% of the site is covered by natural resource areas. And it's impractical to put 90% of the site of the property into a separate tract to still maintain sufficient area for reasonable residential development. So what he's done is submitting the alternatives analysis as the alternative to putting that much of the property into that separate tract. The materials include the amended alternatives analysis table that identifies the proposal, minimizing the disturbance to the HCA on the site. The proposed 5-lot subdivision, while under the required minimum density, so there's a variance being requested for that, will disturb far less HCA, of course, than what was previously proposed under the 12-lot proposal. It will permanently disturb, as I said, approximately 3,100 square feet of HCA. The 12-lot proposal would have permanently disturbed over 30,000 square feet of HCA. The 5-lot subdivision has approximately 8,600 square feet that would be temporarily disturbed to remove the existing gravel driveway that's on the site and install sanitary sewer laterals and dry wells. But once those are in, then it's mitigated and replanted. And kind of comes back to being to not being permanently disturbed, no pavement or buildings or anything like that. That area, that temporary disturbance also accounts for any necessary cuts for the fill associated with construction of each of the houses. And those areas, as I said, would be then restored with vegetation. So the proposal does in fact minimize the impact to the HCA as much as possible and still maintain some sort of development possibility on the property. The remaining HCA that's outside of those developed areas would be contiguous to the lots, as we saw. So the vast majority of the site still remains open, including that, of course, that island area that's west of the slough. That was originally proposed as a mitigation area for the 12-unit alternative. The applicant is proposing to dedicate that area, which is almost 70,000 square feet. So it's 1.66 acres of land. As a potential expansion of Spring Park. So the proposal is to dedicate that entire area to the city. So that dedication area is nearly 50% of the entire site area, of the total site area. And then and the proposal is that dedication would occur. The applicant proposed at the certificate of occupancy we have conditions of approval that would require that dedication, those materials to be submitted with the final plat. For the project. So essentially what we see here is that the mitigation of 3,100 square feet of permanent HCA disturbance is 1.66 acres of permanently protected parkland that would be dedicated to the city. That is over 20 times the size of what is being permanently disturbed as part of the project, which we believe does more than adequately cover the area of disturbance as part of the project. Next slide, please. So this photograph was generously shared with by Councilor Beatty, and we have credited the photo to Emergent Tree Works. But what you can see here is that the mitigation area is identified here in red. So that would be that section of area of mitigation. So again, 1.66 acres is being proposed to be dedicated to the city as an expansion of Spring Park. Okay, next slide, please. So the Willamette Greenway does cover the entire site. You can see it here in the green hatched area with the site itself outlined in blue. The purpose of the Willamette Greenway is to protect, conserve, enhance, and maintain natural, scenic, historic, and recreational qualities of lands along the Willamette River and any major courses flowing into the Willamette River. And again, the entire property is subject to this review. Next slide, please. So these are the approval criteria for the Willamette Greenway review. We've seen these before. Again, we're looking at compatibility with the character of the river, protection of views, landscaping, vegetation, public access, etc. So next slide, please. So these are the summary of issues that we're looking at when we're evaluating the project against the Willamette Greenway criteria, because we're looking at the suitability of the site for the proposed development. So at this point, with the amended plan, approximately 24,000 square feet of the site would be altered in some way to accommodate the proposed development, and that includes the 2 existing homes on the site. That represents approximately 17% of the entire site that would be altered in some way to accommodate the development. Next slide, please. So again, 17% of the site would be altered to accommodate the development. As related to the approval criteria, and as we've discussed in previous presentations, views to the river are considered from the public right-of-way. That's where we're looking at protection of the views. When staff visited the site, stood on 19th Avenue in front of the property, there are small areas of the Willamette River that are visible from the street to the north and the south of the properties on the west bank. But existing views from the public right-of-way to the river are limited. The majority of the views are really to Elk Rock Island and to the slough, of course. The overall views from the public right-of-way are limited. The reduction in the overall development size responds to early concerns about the appropriateness of the development in the Willamette Greenway, particularly with the dedication of that significant area of land west of the slough. That provides really a superior view to the river and public access to the river as an extension, a potential extension to Spring Park. Certainly then that then would be afforded from 19th Avenue as adjacent to the property itself. So that dedication of about 1.66 acres of land, we believe offsets the impacts of the development and protects that island area from any development or any disturbance in the future. Okay, next slide, please. So a number of variances are being requested as part of this project. This chart was in the staff report, and what I've circled are sort of the variances that are being requested. Again, lots 1 and 5 are the lots that have the existing homes. 2, 3, and 4 are the ones that are in the middle. So you can see, in this chart what the minimum requirement is in the R5 zone, and then how the various lots respond to those minimum standards. So we have variances to minimum street frontage for 2 of the 3 new lots. Minimum lot width is being requested. The variances to minimum street frontage are 1 foot and 6 inches for lots 2 and 4. Minimum lot width, though, is measured at where the building is. So the applicant is asking for variances to lot width on all 3 of those infill or those interior lots. The side yard height plane limit is being requested on lots 2, 3, and 4. And that really relates to the fact that the site drops down about midway, kind of, if you imagine sort of east-west, the length of the proposed home, there's a drop in the elevation of the site itself. The side yard height plane limit does not take into account elevation changes like building height measurement does. Provide some relief when you have an elevation change like this. And what the side yard height plane limit is trying to do is to minimize the amount of bulk of a new building at the side yard setback. So those 3 lots are the ones that are affected by this. We have requested, or we have included a condition of approval that would require that the side yard height plane standard is met at 19th Avenue and sort of carried due west, basically, for the entire length of the building. But where the elevation change drops, that's the part of the home that would not meet the standard. And so the variance is being requested for that, basically that portion of the house. Otherwise, there would be essentially a step in the house to be able to meet that standard. So we have included a condition of approval that would provide for that variance, but for essentially the rear portion of the homes, so that we can maintain that side yard height plane for the entire house itself. And then finally, the minimum density. The minimum density on this site is 12 units, as has been discussed in prior hearings. The proposal is for 5 units. So a variance is required to reduce the density below the minimum density required in the R5 zone.
So Vera, just to clarifying question, they're not seeking a variance on the height of the buildings and the height.
Not on the height, no.
And that is 35 feet?
Correct, yep. 2.5 stories, 35 feet, correct. No, it's not the height that's at issue. It's how the building is with the way the side yard height plane, essentially if you have your typical gabled roof that has a sloped roof, generally on a flat site, though that style of home will always meet the side yard height plane. It's so that you don't have a lot of roof bulk at the side yard setback. But because this property drops, the way it's measured is you measure 20 feet from grade up, and then you do a 45-degree angle up the wall, and it's intended to reduce the bulk of that amount of roof at the side yard setback. But when your property drops, that 20 feet is now, it could be midway up the wall, I mean, depending on what kind of style of house. So there's no way the back part of those houses would meet the side yard height plane. It's impossible because of that elevation change. So the requested variance would basically, you'd sort of, wherever essentially we're imagining the grade at the street is sort of the grade that we would be keeping all the way to the west, and from there is where we'd be measuring the side yard height plane. So they're not being, I guess I would put it that they're not being punished for having that elevation change at the rear of the property. Our code provides for a different way of measuring building height when you have an elevation change, but it doesn't provide the same bonus or the same way of kind of recalculating the side yard height plane when you have that elevation change. So that necessitated the variance for that design. But it is not a variance to the building height. It's a variance to the height plane standard, which is a design standard more than a height standard. I hope that clarifies it for you.
Thank you.
Great. Okay, so next slide, please. So the approval criteria for variances talks about impacts and benefits of the variances. Are they reasonable? And do they avoid or minimize impacts? And again, are they mitigating any impacts to the extent practicable? In order to minimize any development impacts to the natural resources and avoid the floodplain as much as possible, the applicant is proposing to cluster the new homes along 19th Avenue, leaving the bulk of the property undisturbed. That approach requires narrower lots, and essentially sort of what we might call quote unquote skinny homes on the property sited between the two existing homes on the site. Those lots would measure between 34 and 35.5 feet in width, so they are less than the 50 feet required. The homes themselves would have sort of a building envelope of about 24 feet wide and 50 feet deep. That's establishing essentially the ceiling of what that building footprint would be. They could be smaller, but the idea is that that's the footprint of disturbance and area for those new homes. As I talked about before, the grade change between 19th Avenue and the lower portion of the site is nearly 16 feet. So there's a significant grade change there, and that's affecting that side yard height plane standard that I just talked about. The standard can obviously be met at the street, but it can't be met at the back of the homes. But the homes that will be impacted by that side yard height plane variance are the new homes on either side of them. So it's not really, it's not impacting adjacent adjacent neighbors because there aren't any. They're all in a row basically, and that gives them some flexibility in the home design on the property. And it would only apply to those new homes, and again, only to the back portion of the homes. So those impacts, any impacts, are focused on the new development. And not on existing homes. So staff believes the request is reasonable and is supportable, provided that the standard is met at that front property line. Essentially, what we're really looking at are some trade-offs here in an effort to protect as much and to leave as much of that floodplain and the map natural resources as possible undisturbed, while still providing some building possibility here on the site. We believe that, or we've provided you with findings and conditions of approval to find that these variances are reasonable and are supportable and appropriate for the site. Next slide, please. We did receive comments in time to be included in your packet from the folks that are listed here on the screen. More details were asked for from both Mr. Gherkin and Ms. Elliott. Mr. Decker submitted comments in opposition to the project. Mr. Roberts seemed to indicate that it was that the project was going in a positive direction, but did have concerns about the compatibility of the new homes in the neighborhood. Ms. Cleesby submitted a letter in opposition, specifically about the floodplain concerns, were the bulk of her comments. Notice was provided in writing and electronically to all interested parties, the Island Station NDA, and all properties within 300 feet of the site. I'm including for this hearing as well in order to notify folks about the virtual nature of the hearing. Next slide, please.
Vera, we got two more. Oh, sorry. Never mind.
That comes up later. Council has some decision-making options to approve the amended application and adopt the recommended findings and conditions of approval that were submitted in the packet. You could approve the application and adopt modified findings or modified conditions of approval that you come to. You could deny the amended application. We'll need findings for denial for that. You can always continue the hearing as well to April 21st if needed. Next slide. So staff recommends that council deliberate and vote on a tentative decision on the amended development application, and then continue the hearing to the 21st for a final decision, adoption of findings and conditions if necessary. And that concludes the staff report and presentation. Staff's here and we're here, and we're certainly ready to answer any questions that you might have.
I did have a couple more kind of clarifying questions. Mm-hmm. One is, and I don't know if this is for you or for Dalton, but the houses, are set back from the road and set down somewhat, and the floodplain line comes through them. And we were told that they've agreed to build the first floor above, the 1 foot above the floodplain, right?
Correct.
So does that mean the back of the houses will be on some kind of stilts, or does that mean there will be fill all the way to make the back of the houses be on land?
I'm going to let Dalton answer that question, please.
I can think of several scenarios that they could choose to do with their foundations that would be acceptable. If it is a solid wall, it will have to have openings to equalize hydrostatic pressure. If it's on fill, then there'll have to be excavation on site, but that's possible. It could be on stilts, and then in order to avoid, if it's more aesthetically pleasing, there could be then a lattice around those stick-up piles. The applicant has indicated that it's going to be a stem wall foundation, so I expect to see some holes to equalize the hydrostatic pressure. But maybe the applicant can provide more details about the foundations if they would like to. The previous, prior to it being amended, it was closer to the higher velocity areas, and there were many more homes too. And so that's why the foundations were such a concern previously. Now they are at the fringe of the floodplain fringe, and so they are clustered in the areas expected of least amount of flood velocity, and so that does allow for more foundation flexibility.
Thank you. And my other question was just an earlier version of the application had a dock in it, and as I recall, the dock was sort of taken out of consideration last time. Is that still the same? No dock in this proposal?
That's my understanding as well, Councilor Beatty, but it was not part of the amended application, and we didn't review it against, our criteria for a dock. So if that's something that is proposed later, we'll need to go through that land use review process at that time.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Hi, Vera. I have a question too. The applicant proposed to dedicate the island when they got their certificate of occupancy. You are recommending that they do it at the approval of final plat, which I assume happens well before occupancy. Why? You're still muted.
I needed the host to unmute me. It was requested when staff talked about it, particularly with Denny as well. We wanted to have that dedication happen very early in this process. At the final plat stage is when the lots are actually created. It's when the applicant can sell the lots if needed or what have you, but they're not really lots until the final plat. It's more logical if you're going to be partitioning off properties and you're going to create that separate parcel to be dedicated. It should all happen at that time. And we also thought that it should happen earlier rather than later. If we waited till final occupancy of buildings, that who knows when that happens. And we thought that it ought to happen earlier in the process. The applicant can certainly speak to this himself, but I'm not aware of an issue with that at this point as well, but I'll let the applicant speak to that himself.
Okay, great, thanks. Yeah. Anybody else have any questions of Vera before we?
I don't have any.
I think my question's probably for the applicant, but Vera, maybe you can just confirm. You mentioned in your report that there were lots of comments about there wasn't a consideration of fewer units, which they've now done, but there also doesn't appear that there was any consideration of any kind of multifamily or middle housing to avoid the variance of the minimum density. Is that the case, or are you aware of any considerations that just weren't reflected in the report?
I am not aware of a multifamily option as part of this. My understanding was that the idea was to keep everything out of the floodplain, and that was done through this five lot subdivision. I'm not aware of a multifamily option.
Okay, and not just multifamily, but what we have a definition for middle housing, so duplex or triplex or now even fourplex.
Right. No, I'm not aware of that being a consideration. No.
Okay.
Anybody else? Okay, thanks, Sarah. I will recognize those wishing to speak, and any questions should be addressed through me. When you begin to speak, state your name and city of residence for the record. For those who do wish to testify, you may submit written comments via the Zoom chat function or an email to ocr@milwaukeeoregon.gov.
Isn't the applicant on now?
It gets there, just
okay.
Reading the thing.
Okay.
I will read those comments out loud. For those who wish to testify orally in Zoom on the participant board, please raise your hand icon and I will call on you and unmute you to allow you to testify. If you are having technical difficulties, send an email or a chat message and one staff will attempt to help. Presentation times for all speakers will be limited. The applicants and representatives of groups will be limited to 15 minutes. Individuals will be limited to 3 minutes. To those of you speaking, please confine your remarks to the relevant criteria, avoid repetition and irrelevant information. All right, so the first up we have...
Mr. Mayor, before you go on, I think you skipped over the correspondence question.
No, she answered it already. But we can do it. The last thing that Vera said before she started taking questions was she went through all the correspondence.
And then those were the ones that were in the staff report, but there were the ones since.
Okay. If the city has received any correspondence on this matter, other than those in the items included in the packet, staff will read any brief correspondence into the record. Other items will be summarized and identified by date and name of the sender. Have we received any additional correspondence on this matter?
We have. We received comments from Beth Mills. in opposition to the project, mostly due to floodplain concerns. We also received today from the applicant some sort of summary comments, I think, from the applicant, but he'll be presenting today as well, so he can go over those in greater detail if necessary. But those are the only two pieces of correspondence received since the packet went out.
So, when this says read any brief correspondence into the record, Scott, were you intending her to actually read the correspondence into the record?
I don't know that she needs to. She's reported them, and we'll make them available on the line online tomorrow.
Okay.
And Mr. Mayor, I did receive a note from Mr. Robinson, who will unmute Mr. Robinson and Mr. Gillis in a moment here. He indicated that Mr. Gillis will be speaking first, followed by Mr. Robinson, and they asked for a 6-minute warning. To the best of my ability, we're running our usual clock, and so I don't know if I'll hold this up for 15 minutes, but I will make my valiant effort to let you know when you're running out of time. So, Mr. Mayor, I'll go ahead and unmute them if that's where we're at next in the script.
Yeah.
Okay, unmuting Mr. Robinson and Mr. Gillis, and I will push start on the timer.
Hi, my name is Matt Gillis. The address is 11650 Southwest 67th Avenue, Suite 210, Tigard, Oregon. We listened to a lot of your comments of the HCA disturbance and the floodplain. I did want to quickly talk about the comment on multifamily. If we were to do multifamily in 12 units, it would significantly add more disturbance and go much further into the floodplain. In order to do that, we need much more parking. We need and a lot more square footage to go further into the floodplain. So we would be looking at least 15 to 20,000 square feet of additional disturbance to do multifamily to get 12 units in there. Our goal was to minimize the impact as much as possible, because that's kind of what we heard in terms of feedback from the floodplain and the HCA. Our new proposal clusters everything at the street. It minimizes impact. We're not going to have any fill in the floodplain. It'll be a no net fill, and so anything that is moved around is coming from the site in the floodplain. It'll be built to FEMA code in Title 18. In terms of the building footprints, we designed a site plan with, the building footprints are the maximum allowed building footprints. We try to make a reasonable building footprint that minimizes disturbance to HCA, that is to minimize the floodplain impacts. They will have flow-through foundations, either of a stem wall or piers, that haven't been designed. This is a subdivision, so the design criteria would come through the permitting process. So, and in terms of the setbacks, we are meeting all the R5 setbacks for the structures themselves. And then with the design of the houses that are clustered, and they're no skinnier than would be allowed with a cluster development. The cluster development allows houses 10 feet apart from each other. That's the maximum allowed with this current site plan. If we went to a cluster, that would be allowed in the same format. The setbacks are 10 buildings have to be 10 feet from each other with a cluster, which is permitted on the site. In terms of design, we're meeting everything else besides the subdivision. We're asking for a subdivision with 3 new lots, so a total of 5. And everything on this site would meet everything besides the variances would meet the code criteria. All the new design standards would meet the code. And then we also wanted to add public access to the extent practicable with the Greenway code. And so we decided to dedicate the island to the city, just to add public access to the Greenway and to the river. was to get minimum density, to have single family houses to meet the character of the neighborhood, which is talked about in the comprehensive plan, and to do and what our biggest feedback was the floodplain and the HCA, and this is pulling everything towards the street out of the floodplain, out of the HCA to the maximum extent practicable, and our footprints are the maximum allowed footprints. And then that's. Do you guys have any questions for me at this point?
Yeah, Matt, the same question I asked Vera around the timing on the plat or on the transfer of the property of the island.
Yeah, Vera's correct. That makes sense, and we agree to the recommended conditions of approval, and we would like you to approve it with the recommended conditions of approval. I've gone through all those, and those are very reasonable conditions in terms of the timing of that. That makes sense. So
okay, all right, thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Any other questions I can talk to that you guys are concerned about?
Anybody? All right.
I'll let Mike speak, and then if he can use up the time, or you can ask me questions as he speaks as well. If you guys have any questions, please let me know.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Gamba, members of the Milwaukee City Council. Can you hear me all right?
Yep.
Great, thank you.
You have about 10 minutes, Mr. Robinson.
Thank you, Scott. My name is Mike Robinson. I'm here tonight on behalf of Matt Gillis. My mailing address is 1211 Southwest 5th Avenue, Suite 1900, Portland 97204. As Matt said, the applicant agrees with the staff report, the careful analysis that's been provided by staff. We agree with the recommended conditions of approval. We've looked at them and we believe they're all feasible to be achieved. Councilor Beatty, before I go on, I wanted to note, you asked about the dock. The dock is not part of the amended application, and if you look at Table 1 in the staff report, which is the alternatives analysis, only, the alternatives analysis for the five lot option, which is before you tonight for approval, expressly excludes the dock. It has nothing about the dock in it, so we want you to be assured that the dock is not proposed. And if you have other questions that you think of during our presentation or during rebuttal before you close your hearing, we'd really appreciate your asking us. We'll do our best to try and answer them. So we hope that at the conclusion of tonight's hearing, you follow the staff report recommendation. We're very comfortable with it. We think it's well reasoned. If you go through the staff report, it cites the substantial evidence that's before you that demonstrates how the approval criteria are met. I think the findings are well done. I've reviewed them. I think they're fully defensible if the council chooses to adopt them. So let me talk about a few things if I could, and I'll try not to use the full 10 minutes. Matt's application, amended application, asks for several variances, but they're quite modest. They only apply to the 3 new lots. They're intended really to account for the location of those lots between the end existing dwellings. Some of them are very minor, as Vera noted. The minimum density is important because that lets us reduce, to the extent there's concern about impact, that lets us reduce them. And so we're going from 12 dwelling units to 5 dwelling units. I noted that the staff report said several times, and this is accurate, that this proposal is 60% smaller than the original proposal. It's also important to note, as Councilor Beatty asked Ms. Collias, there is no variance to the height. What the variance is the plane of the roof on the rear of the lots, and that's to account for the sloping nature of the site at that point. And variances really are a safety valve. So they're intended to be applied in a situation like this, where the site characteristics require deviation from the normal standards. Taken together, this application results in a 90% reduction to the HCA impact, 7 fewer dwelling units, reduced floodplain footprints, and preservation of more open space. If you recall, and Scott Dalton talked about, I may not have got your name right, the assistant city engineer, so my apologies, but the assistant city engineer talked about how we treat that bottom floor. Matt's plan is to have stem walls with opening. That meets FEMA guidance. That meets the building permit or the building code standards. Thank you, Scott. And that lets the council be assured that these structures are not at risk in the flood fringe of the floodway. Let me address a couple of the issues that have been raised in the written testimony. I think construction activities and impacts are always raised. They're really not relevant to the approval criteria, but they're clearly a concern for the neighbors. And so we commit to following those Milwaukee Municipal Code provisions that govern the kinds of impacts that construction activities generate: noise, trash, time of day of construction operations. And we'll follow those with rigorous diligence to make sure that we have as few impacts on our neighbors as possible. Some of the comments suggested a lack of substantial evidence. If the council reads the staff report with the findings, each approval criteria is expressly addressed. There's substantial evidence in the record where it's needed to be reflected that addresses how those approval criteria are satisfied. The design review is really only, and the staff report does a good job of explaining how Milwaukee Development Code 19.505 applies here, but it only applies to that very front area. And so this is not the same kind of application you had before you. This is really a single-family subdivision application. I think Vera did a good job in the staff report and her comments tonight in addressing the view to and from the river. We think that that was satisfactorily addressed in the prior testimony. And then just one other thing, to the extent all the comments deal with one way or another about the impact on the land, and we think those are fair things to testify about. This is 3,100 square foot of impact in exchange for 1.66 acres of mitigation. 83% of the site is not altered, and the island actually goes into public ownership. So there are a number of important mitigations that Matt has offered up under the alternatives analysis, and that should address, we hope, the concerns about the impact on these environmental areas. Let's see. Oh, let me go back, if I could, just let me see if there's any other council questions that I want to ask. I think Mayor Gamba, Matt answered your question. Councilor Falconer, you asked about consideration of middle housing, and Vera, correct me if I'm wrong, the R5 zone limits us at present before state law kicks in as to the type of housing that we can provide there. So I think it's limited, if I recall, to single family and duplexes. But given the area that we're trying to develop these lots in, I think, Matt, if you asked Mr. Gillis about this, would tell you that, as he did, that this is probably more suitable for single family homes. And so that's why he has proposed duplexes. And I don't think we're allowed under the R5 zone to propose the different types of middle housing, at least until this House Bill 2001 kicks in. And I don't think it has yet, if I remember the statute correctly. So we very much appreciate staff working with us on this. We think this is a better product that still meets the approval criteria for this needed housing kind of application. We're glad we had the extra time, and we appreciate the council's courtesy in extending us the extra time to come up with this plan. So let me conclude by saying that we agree with the staff report. We agree with the proposed findings to the city council. We agree with the recommended conditions of approval. As I said earlier, I've reviewed them. I think they're all feasible to be achieved. And we would ask at the conclusion of your deliberation in the public hearing that you approve the application with the recommended conditions. Mayor Gamba, if you need additional time to actually adopt the decision, please ask Matt during the proceedings and he can grant you that. I think your city attorney will tell you that the clock is up tonight, but we've given a conditional extension if you close the hearing tonight, but you need additional time, and Matt could just confirm that for you. Mayor Gamba, that's all I have tonight. Thank you very much. If you have other questions, please ask either Matt or I, and we'll be happy to answer them.
Thank you very much. Anybody have any questions for either?
I actually did have one that occurred to me, and I guess it's really for Mr. Gillis. So most of the other houses along the west side of 19th have kind of angled driveways, and your house, your proposal has 3 new straight-in driveways. Are those really feasible with the slope? Will they work?
Yes, they will work with a slope, and when the civil engineer finishes the final construction drawings, they will blend together. They're not going to be right up against the street. And they might have some angle down from the street. They're not necessarily 100% at street level, but once we get those construction drawings, we'll know exactly where they sit. So that's kind of, we're trying to, this is a subdivision, and so until we have fully engineered construction drawings, you won't I don't exactly know where they're going to sit, but I have a feeling there'll be a slight driveway slope to them, depending on how we just got to get all the design, the architectural stuff done for these. So.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Any other questions?
Emily?
No? All right, thank you. So does anyone wish to speak in support of the revised application? Individuals will have 3 minutes. So is the chat open to people to raise their hands, Scott?
Opening it now. Oh, yeah, it's been open. And there's no comments, and there's no comments in the email box.
Okay. Are there any individuals who would like to offer neutral testimony? Again, it would be 3 minutes, and looking for raised hands in the chat. All right, not seeing anything. And does anyone wish to speak in opposition to the amended application? Individuals will have 3 minutes, and looking for a raised hand in the chat.
Not saying anything.
Me either. All right. Okay. Does staff have any response to the testimony, to the applicant's testimony?
I'm unmuting Mike Dalton and Vera now.
I just wanted to, if I could, I just wanted to add one thing regarding the Willamette Greenway and the views from 19th Avenue. I just wanted to point council to one of the conditions of approval that requires, so as Matt indicated, the houses are proposed to be constructed to meet all the required minimum setbacks, and one of the conditions is, requiring that interior setback, that 10 feet between the buildings, be kept open. So while, we don't have sort of the unobstructed view from 19th Avenue, what we're hoping to create through that condition of approval are these basically sort of these view corridors between the houses. So yes, the houses will be meeting the side yard setbacks, but we do have a condition of approval kind of requiring that remain open, so that as someone is walking down 19th, there are these, albeit limited, but there are these open corridor views to the west towards.
What does that mean, remain open? Like no shrubbery over a certain height, or no trees in there? Trees have to be behind the house, or how does that actually?
I think the way we had intended it, that there wouldn't be any structures or any kind of anything built in between there. I mean, vegetation is one thing, but it was really intended to limit or restrict any kind of outbuildings or anything like that in kind of in those areas, so that we're sort of maintaining that those view corridors. So we're utilizing the step back and then kind of expanding that a little bit to make sure that that we're keeping those unobstructed when it comes to structures and that sort of thing. So I just wanted to kind of point that out, that we tried to cover some of those things within the conditions of approval as well.
Okay. Anything else? Okay. Matt or Michael, do you guys have any rebuttal or anything else you want to add or say?
Matt, do you have anything you'd like to say before I give my last 2 sentences?
I'll talk for just 1 second. Just to the height plane. The height plane really only affects the new homes, and it's all due to the slope. And so we've designed these to be the least amount of impact, the most minimal impact to the HCA, the floodplain, and to fit in with the neighborhood of the single-family nature of the neighborhood. And we're leaving 83% of the site not altered, and it is 60% smaller than the original proposal. And we agree with the recommended conditions of approval, and I ask that you approve this proposal with conditions.
Mayor, my two sentences are, thank you very much for your questions tonight, and we hope that you'll approve the application.
Very good. Thank you. Council, any other last questions before we close public testimony? No? All right. If there are no further questions, I will entertain a motion to close the public comment part of the hearing.
We'll move to close the public comment part of the hearing.
I'll second.
It's been moved and seconded to close the public comment part of the hearing. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Willie, you're muted, so I have no idea whether you're opposed or for it or.
No, I
Nodded.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, the public comment part of the public hearing on the application, files number NR 2018-005 and AP 2019-003 is closed. This hearing has been designed for the council to take public comments, discuss the amended application, and if possible, reach a tentative decision. Staff is requesting the council continue the hearing to April 21st, 2020 for a final decision and adoption of findings or for further deliberation if needed. Are councilors ready to begin deliberation? All right. Who wants to start?
Well, I'm happy to start if nobody's chomping at the bit. I actually think we can approve it as written, and we may not need the 21st. I think it's a pretty good proposal. I really appreciate the fact that Mr. Gillis listened to the concerns last time around. It's it adds some housing stock, and not affordable housing stock probably, but it adds some housing stock. It addresses a underutilized and frankly often blighted parcel in the neighborhood, and I think he's done a nice job, and I'm fine with it as written, as the conditions as the staff has written them.
Okay.
I would second that. I think that I agree that the variances are modest. I think that I want to address this because it comes up when we have variance requests. This idea that someone is sort of getting away with something. Our code has variance options for these types of reasons, and any application has the right to pursue that avenue. So I also appreciate especially the mitigation. I think that it's more than enough in avoiding the concerns with the WQR and the HCA. And in terms of responding to the Greenway, I really really appreciate that protection of the views when we talk about the Greenway. The idea isn't that we have to protect every single point of view to or from the river. And in fact, this application, by dedicating so much right-of-way to the public, creates substantially more view to and from the river. So I just thought that there were a couple of points there that were worth clarifying for people, in the public, in terms of, why personally I think that this has been such a responsive amended application, and also just sort of as a message, to folks, who are listening in, that, there's a process here that we follow, and I think that it's been served well. So,
I certainly agree with what the other council members have said. I was impressed that they were able to come back to us with a good application. I love the idea of seeing some new homes down there. They may not look like some of the other ones that have been there forever and ever, but everything has to change at some point in time. I like the idea of, the dedication of the land that's, like you said, Council President Faulkner is going to actually give us more access to the river than what we've had before. So that's good. Yeah, I'm in support of it.
Yeah, I agree. I think I was very impressed with the revised application in all aspects. I think the response to the concerns about flooding are perfect. I don't. We could not have asked for a better application, frankly. You're to be commended for making such a significant move, and I am well aware that it is a significant change from your original application.
Maybe there could have been duplexes.
Yeah, but yeah.
In any case, I think it's outstanding. So I don't think we need to, unless staff tells me differently. I think I'm prepared to vote on this exactly as written tonight.
With the staff recommendations.
Farah, do you have any issues with just going ahead and, or do we even have a?
We don't have language for a motion, but we might be able to
cobble it together. You want to take a 5-minute recess and write a motion?
Words for a motion?
Well, I mean, I could probably do it off the cuff, to be honest. I was planning commission chair for long enough. I could probably.
Vera, Vera, please.
If I could, I'm so sorry. We did, the only thing that I just wanted to identify, and because we were tweaking it still this afternoon, we have 2 minor revisions to 2 conditions within the list of conditions. So if it's okay, can I read them into the record and have it, they're not substantive, they're clarifying, if anything, but we just wanted to make sure we got it 110% right for tonight, just in case.
Sure.
So as your review, and so I'm going to talk, but I'm going to have to flick over to my screen here so I can read what I'm saying. But the conditions that I'm referring to, there was a small typo on the first page. It's condition number 3, subsection D. It should read, submit an access study for the new driveway alignment at 12225 Southeast 19th Avenue that satisfies MMC 12.16.040.B.2. We didn't have the correct code reference in that one. And then in condition number 4, which is the prior to approval of any development permits, and it's little subsection N, the last one. We rewrote that one a little bit. This is how the variance applies to the side yard height plane. And so we tweaked it a little bit, and the way it should read now is the variance to the side yard height plane on lots 2 to 4 does not apply to the front of the houses and only applies to the portions of the lots where the grade falls away from the street. For these lots, the side yard height planes that are required at the front lot building lines must be extended horizontally to the west and applied to the portions of the homes behind the front lot building lines. And so what that does is it clarifies that we're basically carrying that front building line all the way west horizontally so that it's clear where it applies to the homes. But so we were tweaking that even nearly at 5 o'clock today. So that's what I'm so sorry. But with those 2, minor revisions, I'll speak for staff. We're ready to go. So.
All right.
Okay, I'm typing up my my motion so I can send it around to you guys because I know the mayor has to repeat it. Everyone has to repeat it. So hold on.
Model of efficiency.
Yeah, just the next thing is tell me how to open up email while I've got this stuff.
See, I have 2 devices going. That's my.
Actually, I'll use my other laptop to open up the email. So, yeah.
Okay. Here it comes. Okay. Okay. So now I've sent it. Now I can't read it because I sent it.
We'll need a council polling on this, right? And then Ann will need to read it twice, or no? Scott, you're muted.
It's not an ordinance, so I don't think Ann has to read it twice.
It's not an ordinance, so I think, unless Justin or Vera correct me, I don't think we have to poll it. We could poll it whenever you want, but.
Okay, no, just double checking.
Okay, so let me know if this passes muster, Justin and Vera. I move for approval of the Elk Rock Estates amended application file numbers NR 2018-005 and SP 2019-003 and the recommended findings and conditions of approval as modified by staff comments this evening.
Second.
Vera is saying it's AP 2019, not SP.
Oh, you're right. Okay. Yep. Okay. Hold on. I'll read it again. I move for approval of the Elk Rock Estates amended application files NR 2018-005 and AP 2019-003 and the recommended findings and conditions of approval as modified by staff comments just prior to this motion.
Second.
It has been moved and seconded for approval of the Elk Rock Estates amended application files number NR 2018-005 and AP 2019-003 and the recommended findings and conditions of approval as modified by staff verbally during the meeting. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? None heard. It passes unanimously. Congratulations.
Yeah.
All right. Let me find out if I'm supposed to read more things.
Oh, you know what though? That because there's a script about this or not. I'm looking at Justin now. Do we not have to say anything about appeal or anything?
Vera and I were just chatting about that.
He said something earlier in the evening about Luba. It was earlier on in the script.
In the beginning script? Yeah.
Persons with, back under procedures. He said any party was standing ... Luba.
Yeah.
Yep.
I believe the posture here is this was a decision on an amended application amended pursuant to ORS 197.522 was amended after within the appeal process of the Planning Commission denial. So I believe for the purposes of process here, the appeal is denied and the amended application is approved, and there will be a final order entered approving the amended application, and that approval is subject to review at LUPA should a party withstanding determine to appeal it.
Okay.
Could you I believe that is the procedural posture of this convoluted case.
Do you want a new motion denying, or do you want a new motion that says something about denying the appeal, or?
Well, I don't.
And accepting the amended application?
We already accepted the amended application that was submitted in response to a proposed denial of the appeal. So I suppose we need to close the loop on the appeal. And
maybe we do need to come back on the next meeting. I mean,
I think we might need to close the loop on the appeal and then approve the amended application. Could you?
Yeah. Otherwise, we got the cart before the horse.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's,
Do you want us to take 5 minutes and write that up, or?
Can we just do, we deny the appeal and then we have them?
Actually, why don't we take a break and let staff?
Oh, okay.
Yeah, let's take a 5 minute recess. Justin, if you could pen that up and then email it to us all.
okay.
Thank you.
Nobody on Zoom, hang up.
No, just leave it
Where
like
you
it
are.
is. Good. I have to go feed my cat.
Darren will take us off air for 5 minutes.
Great.
All right, so we are going to be making a slight change to the motion just to be, have all our legal ducks in a row, but the intent is exactly what we meant to do last time. So, Lisa, are you going to give it a shot?
Well, I thought we were keeping the motion we had done.
Oh, we're going to
just doing a second motion, which is to deny the appeal.
Okay.
So here's the motion. I move for denial of the appeal of the original Elk Rock Estates application files NR 2018-005 and AP 2019-003.
I'll second.
Okay, it has been moved and seconded for denial of the appeal
of the original
application for files number NR 2018-005 and AP 2019-003. Is there any further comment? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? None heard. It passes unanimously. Well done, everyone. Okay. Oh, and I got to read the LUBA thing. Any party withstanding may appeal the decision of the council to the State Land Use Board of Appeals according to the rules adopted by that board. Persons withstanding are those who testify via Zoom or comment by email. Persons with standing are those who have participated in this public hearing by any of the following methods. 1, providing written testimony in advance. 2, providing written comments during the testimony portion of the hearing tonight via Zoom, chat, or email. Or 3, providing oral testimony via Zoom during the testimony portion of tonight's hearing. All right. Get back to, and that's it. Are we doing it? We don't have any other council reports, right? So then I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
Also move.
I'll second.
It's been moved and seconded to adjourn. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? All right. We are adjourned. Excellent job on the first full Zoom meeting. Even avoided Zoom bombing and everything. Good job.
Especially Scott. Thanks, Scott.
Yeah. Great.